my name is Evelyn and welcome to the first installment of our DC video demonstrations. This video is going to focus on the core of the game Solitaire. Solitaire contains the fundamental rules of the game, and once you learn how to play this, you will have a much easier time picking up the other three formats to play with more players. Those formats are competitive, cooperative, and multiplayer. This is the starter box. It comes equipped and ready to play Solitaire. Inside the starter you will find 10 adventure cards, 5 of which are adventures, and 5 of which are quest cards, 30 double-sided tokens, and 2 decks of 65 cards. The game is played by repeating 4 steps until either the conditions of winning or losing occur. These 4 steps make up a round. These steps create encounters for your party and allow you to respond to combat, attack, and retaliation. Then prepare the play area for the next round. Your objective is to complete 2 out of 3 pre-selected quests or to deplete the dungeon. If you try to draw a dungeon card from the deck but cannot, you have depleted the dungeon. Should you lose all of your adventures in battle or try to draw another crawler card from the deck but cannot, you have lost the game. To play Solitaire, you will pick 4 adventures and place them in marching order. The adventurer to the furthest left is by default the primary target in combat, and first in the marching order. Adventurers are picked according to their stats. Typically, the adventurer with the highest life score is first, as this is the default primary target. Once the adventurer has taken as many wounds as they have a life score, these guys will perish and be removed from the game. Next, we're going to choose 3 out of 5 quests. For this demonstration we chose Evil Has a Name, Rescue the Damsel, and The Stars Align. Evil Has a Name is a guaranteed encounter because there is one unique named character in the dungeon deck called Green-Knee Goblin Necromancer. Rescue the Damsel is another guarantee because we know that the trap named Damsel is within the dungeon deck as well. Lastly, we have Stars Align. This is more of a random encounter that is dependent on particular cards in the play area at the same time. The dungeon deck is placed above the crawler deck to the left of the play area. It contains all the characters, events, terrains, and traps that our adventurers will face on their journey. Standard games have 80 cards in both the dungeon and crawler decks. Make sure you leave enough space around the decks for their corresponding graves. The crawler deck contains all the exceptional tricks and the trades that the adventurers will need to make it through the dungeon alive. Cards such as equipment, magic, skills, and tactics. Notice that the tokens have been placed off to the side and our rulebook nearby to look up any abilities that might require referencing. Also, if you get stuck on which step is next, or what order the game proceeds in, we have printed a quick reference guide on the back of the rulebook. Before we can begin playing, we need to build our hand. The default hand limit is 5 cards, so we need to draw 5 cards from the crawler deck. To determine what cards can be brought into play, we look at the value of the cards. Note that the cards that we have drawn have images that resemble the smaller resource symbols found on our adventurers. The money bag represents equipment, the spark magic, the hand skill, and the flag equals tactics. Whoever has the highest score on resource is the best at providing that resource. For instance, the highest total cost of equipment cards we can put into play is 4 because of the Gold Dwarf Warrior. These resources do not stack. If the Dwarf Warrior leaves play or is locked, the next highest score is 2 from the Scout. Basic cards like Flaming Fury only have 1 text box. As long as you can afford to put it into play with your resources, you can gain from its benefit. Brawling is a permanent card. Whenever permanents come into play, their cost will occupy that resource as long as it remains in play. We also have disruption cards like Weakness and Take Aim. These cards can be used to manipulate the encounter that you are facing or can be used against an opponent in competitive or multiplayer games. These are indicated by their dual red-colored text boxes. For Solitaire, we disregard the red text box found on cards like Weakness. Now we're ready to start playing. To build the encounter, we draw cards and place them face up in the play area until we get a total of 5 points in play. The value of a card is determined by looking at the top left-hand corner. The total value of cards should not exceed the default value of 5. It doesn't matter what the symbols are at this time. The first card we have drawn was Zombie. It gives us a total of 1 point. The second card was Graveyard for 2 points. When Graveyard comes into play, it has something called Time Limit 2. This means that we will put 2 time tokens on it and it will stay in play for 2 additional rounds. Next we will draw the Skeleton, which costs 0, leaving us still at a total of 2 points. Next is Poisonous Dart Trap. It costs 2. That gives us a total of 4 points in play. We have 1 more point to go. We will cap the encounter off with Unlucky. We have reached the limit and will stop drawing cards now. During the response phase, we evaluate cards in hand in regards to cards that are in play. This is also a good opportunity to play any non-stamina or power cards to prepare for combat. Ideally, we view combat as if the adventurers are busting into the dungeon, in which case we get to attack first. So the first thing we have to do is determine the defense of the dungeon. When evaluating the dungeon, we check for life scores provided by dungeon cards in play. The only card in play with a life score greater than 0 is the Zombie. Next, we will search for an attribute called Armor. This is also currently found only on the Zombie. Lastly, we would check for any special attributes that would increase the encounter's stamina pool. For instance, Graveyard increases the stamina for all undead or spirits in play. This will increase the total dungeon stamina by 2 for the Skeleton and the Zombie. We add those all together to determine the total dungeon defense of 4. We also check each card for special abilities that may interfere with our attack. In this case, Unlucky starts our attack off at a deficit of 2 power. The Poisonous Dart Trap will trigger during retaliation for a power of 5. In addition, it will deal poison if it is successful on its attack. We can also take into consideration the total amount of attack power in the dungeon. The total attack power in the dungeon for this encounter is 11. As a response to the analysis of the dungeon, we are going to play combat training to remove the zombie from play and into the grave. This will lower the dungeon's defense and retaliation during combat. This can also be a good time to put any permanents into play. For one skill, we can play Brawling to prevent a wound later on. Remember that this card is a permanent and it will occupy its cost as long as it's in play. This will leave us an additional 3 skills since the Gypsy Thief provides 4. Adventurers have no visible attack or stamina score. In order to attack or defend, you need to activate them to indicate their position of action. They can then contribute +1 to the action of attack or to defend. Adventurers may contribute to both if they have been reset and reactivated for another action, but may only contribute to an action once per step. We can increase the power of attack or defend by adding crawler cards into play. By default, our adventurers have melee harm attack. However, they adopt attributes granted to them by crawler cards. In order to attack, we must meet or exceed the dungeon's defense and overcome the deficit for the encounter with the Unlucky. Since we remove the zombie from play, we only need to activate 3 of our adventurers to meet the stamina of 1 and deficit of 2. It currently does not matter which adventurers we activate, so we will activate the Scout, the Thief, and the Stormcatcher. Each provide +1 power to the attack for a total of 3. Since fate is on the adventurer's side, we win the tie of the attack. You will always need at least 1 adventurer to attack or defend. We can now deliver a wound in combat. The Skeleton is the only available character to target, so we will deliver a wound to it. The number of wounds meets or exceeds the total life score 0, so it is immediately removed from play, joining the zombie, and further reducing the power of the dungeon's retaliation attack. To deliver more than 1 wound in combat, we will need special crawler cards in hand. Now the dungeon retaliates. Looking at what is attacking us, we have 5 power from the Poisonous Dart Trap. This is higher than our remaining adventurer can deal with on his own. Unfortunately for the warrior, we do not have any cards in hand that increase adventurer's stamina. However, we do have a great card in play called Brawling. If we spend it by activating it, we can prevent the warrior from taking a wound. However, it does not prevent special abilities like poison. So although we prevent the wound from combat, we still take the poison and put a poison token on the Gold Dwarf warrior. At the end of combat, we can decide if we wanted to play any more cards. If not, we will end the encounter. Now that the encounter has ended, it is time to clear cards and tokens in sequence to prepare the play area for the next round. If at this time we wanted to drop any stagnant cards from our hand, we may do so now. These will go directly to the Crawler grave. Now we will begin removing cards from the play area. Any cards that have a 0 life score, are without time tokens, or permanency will now leave play and be placed in their corresponding deck graves. Even if we hadn't removed the skeleton from play, during the encounter it would leave play now as it had a 0 life score. However, the zombie would have remained in play until we were able to remove it from play. In the case of Brawling, as it has been spent, it was removed from play. Next, we remove 1 time token from each card that has time tokens. We remove 1 from the graveyard. Next, we will remove 1 poison token from each card that has poison tokens and convert it to a wound, which our Gold Dwarf warrior valiantly endures. Now we can reset cards that are in play, unless of course they have a lock token on them. Currently we do not have any locked adventurers, so they will all reset. If we had any adventurers that were not able to reset due to locks, we would now remove 1 lock token from each of them at this time. If we still had any permanents in play, we would need to make sure we can afford to keep them in play. If we cannot, it will leave play at this time. Now we draw Crawler cards to our hand. We must always draw at least 1 card, but we'll have to draw up to our hand limit, which is still 5. If we had exceeded our hand limit, we would now need to discard down to our hand limit. This is the end of the first round. Next we will build another encounter. We begin the new encounter with 1 card in play, the graveyard, which still occupies 1 point of our encounter limit. We will continue drawing cards to fill up to our 5-point limit. We turn over Falling Stones for 1 point, the Ghoul for 2, that's a total of 4 points in our encounter limit, 1 more point to go. The next card is the Mummy. The Mummy will not come into play as it busts the encounter limit. Instead, the card is placed back on the top of the dungeon deck, face up. Since it was never played, none of its abilities will trigger. Since we can play cards during this phase, the first thing we're going to do is put Veteran into play. This permanent card costs 0, and it allows us to increase our hand limit to 6. It is a great card to have in play. Don't forget to check for life scores, armor attributes, and stamina boosters before moving into combat. All the scores are added together to plan strategically, and in this case we have a total of 3 stamina from the Ghoul that is boosted by the graveyard. Now that we know the total stamina of the dungeon, we should evaluate its retaliation power. The only character in play is the Ghoul with an attack of 4 and Falling Stones with a power of 1. This may not seem intimidating, but these cards have attributes that may change your mind. The Ghoul has Drain 1. If the Ghoul successfully attacks, we will drain 1 Crawler card from the deck into the grave. Falling Stones has Area 4. Area attacks do not only attack the primary target, but also those next to them. So with an Area 4 attack, the trap is actually targeting our entire party. That means each adventurer must find a way to defend themselves. The Ghoul has a high life score and will provide a lasting threat as long as he's in play, so we're going to choose to attack this round in order to shorten his life expectancy. In order to meet or exceed the dungeon's defenses, we need to activate one of our adventurers. We will choose to activate the thief. However, he will only provide +1 power to the attack, so we're going to need a little more power. We can add Flaming Fury, but that will only be +1 power for a total of 2. Not quite enough. However, since Take Aim adds bonuses to ranged attacks like Flaming Fury, we can exceed the dungeon's defenses with a total power of 6. Since we have met or exceeded the dungeon's defenses, we can now deliver wound in combat to the ghoul. Since the ghoul has a life score of 2, we can only place a wound on him because he will still remain in play. Now the dungeon retaliates. Looking at what is attacking us, we have 4 power from the ghoul and 1 power from the trap targeting the primary target, our Gold Dwarf Warrior. The Falling Stones is also targeting all of our other adventurers, so we will need to defend them as well. We can activate the warrior to defend himself and put Hide Armor into play. The Hide Armor will provide +2 stamina for each attacker. In this case, there are 2 attackers, the ghoul and the trap, for a total of 4 stamina. With the warrior's +1 defense, we have a total of 5 stamina and have met or exceeded the dungeon's attack. We then activate the scout and the stormcatcher so that they may defend themselves. Our poor thief, however, is going to take one for the team, as no one can defend him and he cannot defend himself. Often it is better to spread out damage amongst the party than to pile it up on one adventurer and lose them. It is once again time to clear cards and tokens in sequence to prepare the play area for the next round. You can drop any number of undesirable cards from your hand now. They will go directly to the grave. We will now remove cards with 0 life score, or without time tokens or permanency from play, and send them to their corresponding graves. We remove 1 time token from the graveyard, and we would remove 1 poison token if any of our adventurers had them at this time. We can now reset all of our non-locked cards that are in play. Once again, none of our adventurers are locked, so they will all reset. We check our permanents still in play to make sure we can still afford to keep them in play, which is Veteran, of 0 cost, so it will remain in play at this time. Should we find the card is no longer necessary, we would be able to discard it at this time. Now we draw crawler cards to fill our hand. We must always draw at least 1 card, but we'll have to draw up to our hand limit, which is now 6. If we had exceeded our hand limit, we would now discard down to our hand limit. This is the end of the second round. Next, we will draw another encounter. We begin round 3 with 2 cards still in play, the graveyard and the ghoul. These cards take up 3 of 5 points of our encounter limit. We also have a card faced up on the dungeon deck. Because this card is faced up on the deck, it will come into play this round despite the encounter limit. This is called a pull. The mummy also has a come into play attribute, which is indicated by the white downward arrow on the card. This triggers as soon as the mummy enters play. The attribute restocks 3 undead or spirit, 1 cost or less. First, we search the dungeon grave. To do this, we flip over cards until we find the ones that meet the requirement. It is important to keep these cards in order. The first card we find is the skeleton. The second, the zombie. There are no more cards in the grave, so only these 2 will restock, as they have met the requirements. Now we place them randomly in the dungeon deck and reshuffle the deck. We will also take note of the mummy's X power score. This is equal to the number of creatures in the grave. Not all characters are creatures, so when we check the grave, we will take note of the second type. At this time, there are 0 creatures in the grave, so the mummy's power is 0. Not so tough at this time. Let's see what we're up against. The dungeon's defense score is a total of 6. 2 from the mummy, 2 from the ghoul, and a 2 bonus from the graveyard. The power of the dungeon is 4, all of which is coming from the ghoul. Even if we activated all of our adventurers to attack, we would only have a power of 4, and we have nothing in hand to increase that score. So we're going to go entirely on the defensive. By not attacking, we are forfeiting the adventurer's attack, and in some instances it is important to remember that choosing not to take an action for an attack or defend is considered so, even if there is nothing to attack or defend from. Now the dungeon retaliates. Since the ghoul is the only attacker with a positive score, it is the only one we need to worry about, and by activating all 4 of our adventurers, we can meet its power successfully to defend. Now we can end the encounter. You can drop cards, remove cards that have a 0 life score, 0 time tokens, or non-permanency from play. Looks like the graveyard is finally expired. We can also remove time tokens, remove poison tokens, and reset all non-locked cards in play. That does include the dungeon. If any cards were locked, at this time we would now remove a lock token. Now we can maintain permanence. If veteran were causing you to move through your crawler deck too quickly, you may want to discard it to prevent from running out of crawler cards and losing the game. We currently have a hand limit of 6 and have 6 cards in our hand, but we must always draw 1 card. Since we have exceeded our hand limit, we now need to discard down to our hand limit. And this will end round 3. At this time, the ghoul and the mummy occupy our entire 5-point encounter limit. We no longer have a card face up on the dungeon deck, but now we are going to do what is called a flip. Having to flip a card means that the dungeon will keep pushing forward. Despite the card being a 0-cost card, it will still not come into play as it was a flip. It will need to wait until the next round. Notice something else about this card. It is related to one of our quests, Rescue the Damsel. If we can complete that next round, we can complete that quest. So let's look at our encounter. The dungeon's defense score has now dropped to a total of 4, 2 from the mummy and 2 from the ghoul, and the attack score is still only 4 from the ghoul as the mummy still provides 0. If we activate all of our adventurers, we will be able to deliver a wound to the ghoul and immediately send it to its final resting place. With only the mummy attacking, we do not have to worry about being harmed by its attack, as it does not have a positive score, which is a good thing because its attribute of Drain 2 would mean losing 2 crawler cards straight from our deck directly to the grave. Although we have forfeited our right to defend the 0 attack, the drain will not take effect as mummy does not have a positive score. And that will end the encounter. With the damsel coming in the next round, we will surely need some offensive cards in hand, so at this time we're going to drop light and recover treasure. We currently have no cards to remove from play. After dropping cards from our hand, we would remove time tokens, remove poison tokens, reset all cards that are not locked, remove lock tokens if any of our cards were locked, maintain permanence, which currently we have the veteran in play, which costs 0, and draw to fill our hand limit. Since we have not exceeded our hand limit, we would not need to discard at this time. This will end round 4. Welcome to round 5. We currently have 3 points in play provided by the mummy. The damsel now comes into play and we will resume building our encounter normally. The first card we turn over is Goblin Conjurer. The Conjurer has a come into play attribute which summons a creature or animal of 1 cost or less. We will now search for the card by turning over cards from our dungeon, one by one, until we find a card that meets the requirements. Reinforcements is not a character card. Wild Naga is not a creature card. The Shadow Elf is both a creature and a character card, and this card costs 1 or less. This card will come into play and the revealed cards will get shuffled back into the dungeon deck. The Shadow Elf has an ability called Enfeeble, which has Target X. Target X equals whatever the cost of the top card of the dungeon grave is, plus 1, and Enfeeble strips that adventurer's highest resource down to 0. So looking at the ghoul, 1, 2, 3, it's our Gypsy Thief, whose highest score is 4 skill, which is now reduced down to 0. Our next highest skill resource available is the Gold Dwarf Warrior with 2. Although the Shadow Elf costs 1, this card does not contribute to the cost of the encounter because it was summoned into play. So we will now bring in 1 more point into the encounter. This card costs 0, another 0, and we will finally close off our encounter with 1 from the Jungle Troglodyte. The dungeon's defense score is pretty high because of the damsel. She provides plus 1 stamina to each character in play. We have a total of 4 stamina from the Troglodyte, Goblin, Vaginoi, and Conjurer, plus an additional 5 from the Shadow Elf and the Mummy for a grand total of 9. The retaliation power is 14, and the Mummy still provides 0. If we are successful on the attack and defend, we will complete 1 of 3 quests and take a sneak peek into the dungeon. However, if we fail the damsel, there is no way to recover the quest for another attempt, and we will burn cards from our deck. Let's place the belt pouch into play at this point, as it costs 0, and it looks like we will be needing it. As we still don't have enough attack power in our hand, this is definitely the best time to spend the belt pouch. We will refrain from playing any other cards till we see what turns up from the belt pouch. By activating it, we can draw 3 cards from the crawler deck. Since we have Dispel Magic in hand, we can use that against the summoned Shadow Elf and remove her from play. You will notice that the Shadow Elf is a creature, so the Mummy will gain plus 1 power. Now we're going to attack with the Warrior and the Scout. They will provide 2 power to the attack. We're also going to put our short bow into play and the staff for a total power of 7. That meets or exceeds the dungeon's defense, and we can now deliver a wound. We're going to target the Jungle Troglodyte, as he is an extremely dangerous opponent with a poisonous attack. You will notice that the Troglodyte was also a creature, and now the Mummy will gain another plus 1 power. Since we sent the Troglodyte to the grave, we are going to also take this as the opportunity to throw Cleave into the mix. And since we have the Warrior in play, and he's not locked, we can boost it to deliver a wound to 2 different targets. We're going to choose to wound the Mummy and finish off the Goblin Conjurer. Despite the Goblin Conjurer being reduced to a power of 1, because of the ranged attack from the short bow, which equals her distance advantage, she still has magic attack, which will penetrate our defenses when the dungeon retaliates. The Conjurer was also a creature, so the Mummy gains another plus 1 power. We have successfully attacked. Now we must defend from the dungeon's retaliation in order to not lose face with the damsel. We are going to put 2 more cards into play, Phase and Defensive Training. Defensive Training zeroes out the Mummy's attack, while Phase allows us to ignore damage dealt by attackers that deal harm, which the Goblin and the Vaginoi both have. The attackers have been neutralized, but in order for it to count for the damsel's win conditions, we must activate one of our adventurers to show that we are not going to forfeit the defense, and this will win us the defend. We will check for win conditions now. We have fulfilled both win conditions for the damsel on the attack and the defend, and now her ability triggers. We get to sneak peek at the top 3 dungeon cards and rearrange them on the top or bottom as we like. Greenie is another one of our quests. We want to put him back on top of the deck, face down, while we move the dragon and the phantom to the bottom of the dungeon deck. We will not reshuffle. And now the quest for Rescue the Damsel triggers, as you have completed the requirements for it. You may flip it over, or mark the quest with a token to show that it's completed. We can now drop cards from our hand, remove cards from play, and remove time tokens, poison tokens, and reset our cards. Oh, we forgot one. At this time, you could choose to remove lock tokens if you had any, maintain permanence, and draw up to your hand limit, which we still have at 6. If we had exceeded our hand limit, we would now discard. This concludes round 5. Welcome to round 6. We only have the mummy in play at this time, so we can continue to build our encounter to the 5-pointed limit. Our first draw is a bust with Greenie. For this encounter, we only have to manage the mummy, who brings the dungeon's defense to a total of 2. His attack is going to be 5, as there are currently 5 character creatures in the grave. As this is going to be an easy encounter, we're going to activate 2 of our adventurers in order to deal a wound to the mummy and remove him from the game. With the mummy gone, there is nothing for the dungeon to attack us with. This will end our encounter. We can now drop cards from our hand, remove cards that have 0 life score, no time tokens, or permanency from play, remove time tokens, remove poison tokens, reset our cards, remove lock tokens, maintain permanence, and draw our hand. Although we currently have a hand limit of 6 and our hand limit is full, we still draw 1 card. Since we have exceeded our hand limit, we will need to discard a card. Looking at Resurrect, it grants +5 stamina for a cost of 3, and if we could boost it, we would be able to bring an adventurer back to play. But since we do not have the matching class symbol, it is too expensive for what it does, and we will discard it. This will conclude round 6. We begin the new encounter with no cards in play, so we will resume building our encounter to a 5-point limit. Our first card is already face up. That is Greenie. The next card is Kobold for 0, and a Troll for 2. Normally our encounter limit is 5 points, but Greenie increases the encounter limit by 1, so we will continue building the encounter. Dark Corridor provides 0, and 10-foot Pit Trap provides 1. As this will close our encounter, also note that it has a Come Into Play attribute. This Come Into Play attribute places a lock token on the warrior, who is the primary target. While locked, the adventurer cannot attack or defend, and cannot provide his class symbol or resources. Dungeon's total defense score is 3. 2 from Greenie and 1 from the Troll. The total power of the dungeon is 24. The Kobold increases the power of the 10-foot pit trap by 1, and Dark Corridor increases both Greenie and the Kobold by 4 because they have stealth. Stealth prevents a character or adventurer from being a target of a wound if another illegal target is in play. In the instance that all of the characters have stealth, the lowest cost character will be the meat shield. What else do we know about the dungeon? When we look over at Greenie, we see that he is unique, which allows us to complete our Evil Has a Name quest. In order to defeat him, we have to work around his stealth and watch out for other abilities that might trigger, like Reaver. Reaver is an ability that allows Greenie to sacrifice another character and heal if the character's specified type is in play at the end of combat. Greenie's Reaver type is Creature. When Reaver triggers, it will trigger another ability called Summon. We saw this ability earlier on the Goblin Conjurer. Greenie will bring a 2-cost or less undead or spirit by 1 into play. Getting 2 wounds on him could be difficult if we are unable to get around the stealth and if we are not careful when we target him. Let's look at the other cards. We know that the Kobold is providing +1 to the pit trap, and we are aware what the Dark Corridor is doing to this encounter. But what about the Troll? Both the Troll and the Kobold are fine specimens for Greenie's Reaver, but the Troll is the only real legal target in play. Targeting the Troll will be a challenge because he has an attribute called Immune Harm. As we know, our default attacks for adventurers are melee harm, so we'll need a special attack like Flaming Fury to bypass its immunity to our attacks and deliver a wound. But we have a plan. First, we will be putting Moving Search into play and negate the stealth attribute from the Kobold. By negating the stealth attribute, we can make him a viable target, and we can boost this card because of the Thief. Therefore, we do not need to activate one of our adventurers. But as anxious adventurers can be, we decide to activate our Thief to attack and increase his attack power by putting the Longsword into play. By doing this, we have exceeded the dungeon's defense and can now deliver a wound. We choose to place the wound on the Kobold and send it directly to the grave. This strategic maneuver will land us the great victory of defeating the game. If you look to the right, you will see our third quest called Stars Align. With this quest, we must get only 4 dungeon cards into play: 3, 2, 1, and 0. We were able to accomplish this by keeping an eye on all the cards in play at any given time. During this encounter, by simply removing the Kobold from play, we were able to accomplish this. This is not an easy quest to accomplish, as our encounter limit is usually 5 points. But with Greenie's help, we are able to meet these requirements. Enjoy the victory! This concludes our demonstration of Dungeon Crawler Solitaire. We hope that you have enjoyed this presentation, and if you have any further questions, we are available online at dungeoncrawler.com. My name is Evelyn. Take care and happy crawling.